5 days before my sister's wedding, my phone lit up with a message in our family group chat. "You are officially out of the bridal party," she wrote. "Preston's family is arriving soon, and we need to project the right image. Only real family belongs here." I stared at the screen and typed back, "Good. Real family can pay for the venue themselves." My mother replied with a mocking voice note, laughing at my empty threats. She had no idea the venue manager would be calling them the very next morning with a massive bill. "My name is Zora. I am 30 years old, and for my entire life my family treated me like the ultimate embarrassment because I refused to play their exhausting game of keeping up appearances. Before I tell you how my text shattered their fake reality, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to show toxic family members that your worth is not tied to their approval." Growing up in Atlanta, my mother Vivian was obsessed with projecting an image of flawless Black excellence. She was a prominent church board member, always making sure everyone knew our family belonged to the elite. My older sister Chantal was her masterpiece. Chantal was a pediatrician, a former chapter president of her sorority, and the golden child who never made a single mistake. I was the exact opposite. I skipped the prestigious university tradition, never pledged a sorority, and spent my 20s building what my mother dismissed as a little party planning hustle. They never missed a chance to remind me of my place. That Tuesday morning was no different. I was sitting in my downtown penthouse, a home my family did not even know existed, when the family group chat started buzzing relentlessly. I opened the thread to find a massive paragraph from my sister. "I have been thinking about the wedding photos," Chantal wrote. "Preston's family is flying in from Charleston. They are old money and very observant. I need this weekend to be completely flawless. Your uneducated aesthetic is just going to raise questions. I cannot have his parents thinking we come from some ghetto background. You are out of the bridal party. Honestly, it is better if you just stay away from the main events entirely." Before I could even process the absolute audacity of her message, my mother chimed in right below it. "Your sister is absolutely right, Zora. I have spent my entire life building this family's reputation in the community. You have always been a stubborn liability. Do you remember your cotillion when you were 18? You ruined the entire evening by wearing that cheap thrift store suit instead of the custom gown I picked out. I had to face the other church ladies for months after that embarrassment. I will not let you ruin your sister's chance to marry into true wealth. Stay home. Do not bring your negative energy around Preston's family." I sat in my kitchen looking at the city skyline. Years ago, a message like that would have sent me into a spiral of tears and self-doubt. I would have called them begging for forgiveness, offering to change my hair, promising to buy a dress that met my mother's impossible standards just to be included. But I was no longer the insecure girl they loved to tear down. I was a woman who had quietly built an empire while they were busy maxing out credit cards to buy designer bags. I set my coffee mug down on the marble counter. I did not cry. I did not type out a long defense of my character or my life choices. I simply tapped the screen and sent my response. "Good. Real family can pay for the venue themselves." Less than a minute later, an audio message from my mother appeared in the chat. I pressed play, and her shrill, condescending laugh filled my kitchen. "Oh, Zora, you are so pathetic," my mother sneered through the speaker. "Do you really think your little empty threats scare us? You are a glorified caterer. You have nothing to do with the Montgomery estate." Chantal secured that venue because the owners recognized her status as a respected physician. Stop throwing tantrums just because you are jealous. Find something productive to do with your weekend. I locked my mobile phone. They honestly believe Chantal got a $150,000 historic mansion for free because she was a doctor. They had no idea that I personally owned Z Holdings, the parent company that recently purchased the Montgomery estate. I had quietly approved a 100% family discount for my sister's wedding as a wedding gift, hoping it might finally earn me a shred of basic respect. Since I was no longer considered family, the discount no longer applied. I opened my laptop, drafted a quick email to my property management team, and went about my day. The next morning, Vivian and Chantal were sipping champagne at an exclusive bridal boutique preparing for Chantal's final dress fitting. My mother was busy boasting to the boutique owner about her wealthy future son-in-law when Chantal's phone began to ring. I need you to be a team player for once in your life, Zora Vivian said smoothly, sliding a silver pen across the table toward me. This is a personal loan application. It is high interest, but it guarantees rapid approval. $150,000. Sign it right now so we can wire the money. I stared at the paperwork, then back at my mother. I laughed out loud. You want me to take out a massive loan to pay for a wedding you just kicked me out of? You are the only one who can do it, Vivian insisted, tapping her fingernail aggressively against the signature line. Chantal is drowning in $250,000 of medical school debt. My credit cards are completely maxed out, keeping up our elite image at the church and the country club. You are the only person in this family with a pristine credit score and zero student loans. You mean the zero student loans I have because you utterly refused to pay my tuition when I changed my major, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. Do not rewrite history, Zora, Vivian snapped, dropping the sweet mother act entirely. You brought unbearable shame on this entire family when you dropped out of Spelman College. You had a chance to walk the same hallowed halls as generations of elite women, and you threw it away to throw cheap parties. You owe us for the embarrassment you caused. You owe your sister this wedding to make up for your complete lack of ambition. Chantal finally found her voice, stepping closer to the table with pleading eyes. Please, Zora. You do not understand the immense pressure I am under. Preston comes from a powerful dynasty. His family expects absolute perfection from us. If they find out we cannot afford the venue, they will cancel the engagement and ruin my reputation. You have to sign those papers. It is your duty as my sister to protect our family name. My duty! I picked up the thick stack of loan documents, feeling the heavy weight of their entitlement. I looked at the predatory interest rate printed boldly at the top of the first page. I thought about the decade I spent building my real estate and hospitality empire in absolute secrecy, securing my financial freedom while they bought designer clothes they could not afford just to impress people who did not care about them. I thought about how they treated me like garbage, right up until the exact second they desperately needed my credit score to save their fraudulent lifestyle. I gripped both sides of the loan application and ripped the entire packet in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed loudly and sharply in the small apartment. Vivian shrieked, jumping back as the halves hit the floor. What is wrong with you? My duty is to myself, I said, pointing straight at the front door. I do not care about Preston. I do not care about his snobby mother. And I definitely do not care about saving a wedding that I am not even allowed to attend. Get out of my apartment right now. Chantal lunged forward, her face twisted in rage. You selfish brat. I am a doctor. I am marrying into true wealth. You are just a glorified caterer. You will always be a nobody. A caterer who paid your medical school rent when Mom could not get another credit card? I retorted sharply. But you are too blind and arrogant to see the truth. Now get out before I call the police and have you both escorted off the premises for trespassing. Vivian grabbed Chantal by the arm, her face a mask of pure fury. Fine, Vivian spat, adjusting her expensive coat. Enjoy your miserable, lonely life in this pathetic dump. You are dead to us, Zora. Do not ever contact us again. I slammed the door behind them and locked the deadbolt. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up my phone. I opened the live feed from the discreet security camera I had installed flush with the peephole on my front door. I watched the crystal-clear video of my mother and sister standing in the hallway. Chantal was pacing frantically. What are we going to do, Mom? Eleanor is going to ruin me. Preston will leave me. The wedding is destroyed. Vivian grabbed Chantal by the shoulders, whispering sharply. Stop crying. I still have her social security number from her old college applications. We will just go online and forge her signature on a digital loan application. The money will hit the account by tomorrow morning. She will not know a single thing about it until long after you are happily married and on your honeymoon. The Oakmont Country Club was a fortress of old Southern money, practically dripping with exclusivity and unwritten rules. It was Preston's choice for the rehearsal dinner, a place where the walls were covered in oil paintings of stern white men, and the staff moved like invisible ghosts. My mother and sister had spent months bragging about this venue, treating it like their official initiation into high society. They were inside right now, surrounded by Preston's family, laughing too loudly and trying desperately to prove they belonged among the elite. I stepped out of my car and handed the keys to the valet. I had not been invited to this dinner, but I was not about to miss it. I walked through the heavy oak doors wearing a custom-tailored crimson Tom Ford suit. The cut was razor-sharp, commanding absolute attention the moment I entered the room. I bypassed the hostess stand entirely, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I did not look like the uneducated scapegoat they had banished from their lives. I looked like the owner of the building. The dining room was a sea of pastel dresses and navy blazers. At the center table, Chantal sat next to Preston, wearing a forced smile, while my mother nodded vigorously at a story Preston's uncle was telling. I glided past the towering ice sculptures and expensive floral arrangements, fully aware of the hushed whispers starting to ripple through the room. Before I could reach my family, a pale manicured hand abruptly blocked my path. It belonged to Eleanor Preston's mother. She was wearing a string of pearls that looked heavier than her forced smile. She looked me up and down, her eyes catching the bold color of my suit, completely failing to recognize me from the few pictures Chantal had bothered to share. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of polite condescension. "We are completely out of the vintage champagne at table 4. Be a dear and have the kitchen bring out another few bottles right away." She did not even wait for a response, already turning back to her conversation. She took one look at a confident black woman in a sharp suit and immediately assumed I was the help. I smiled a cold, practiced smile. "I would love to help you, Eleanor, but my hourly rate is far outside your budget. I suggest you wave down a waiter instead." Eleanor spun back around, her mouth falling open in shock. Her loud gasp was enough to catch the attention of the main table. Chantal turned her head, and the moment her eyes locked onto mine, the color completely drained from her face. My mother dropped her solid silver fork, the clatter echoing loudly in the sudden quiet of the room. Panic erupted behind their perfectly contoured faces. Vivian and Chantal excused themselves so fast they nearly knocked over their heavy chairs. They practically sprinted across the dining room, their fake smiles plastered on for the wealthy crowd, while their eyes shot daggers at me. Chantal grabbed my left arm. Vivian grabbed my right, and they forcefully dragged me through a set of heavy double doors into a dimly lit private hallway near the coat check. The moment the doors swung shut, the flawless black excellence facade completely vanished. "Have you lost your absolute mind?" Vivian hissed, her chest heaving as she adjusted her designer shawl. "How did you even get past the front gate? You do not belong here. You are going to ruin everything." Chantal was shaking with rage, her hands clenched into tight fists. "I will call security right now," she threatened, her voice a frantic whisper. "I will have you arrested for trespassing. You are just a bitter, jealous failure trying to sabotage the most important night of my life because you have absolutely nothing going for you. Get out of here before Preston sees you." I casually brushed their hands off my expensive suit, completely unbothered by their panic. I leaned against the mahogany-paneled wall and pulled my smartphone from my pocket. "I am not here for the overpriced salmon, Chantal," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "And I am certainly not here because I am jealous of a man who makes you pay for your own engagement ring. I am here because I caught a very interesting notification on my phone this morning." Vivian scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "We do not care about your little notification, Zora. Leave immediately." I tapped the screen and held the phone up right in front of my mother's face. It was a bright red fraud alert from my primary bank paired with a confirmation email from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Did you really think a fake digital signature would work?" I asked, watching my mother's eyes widen in sheer terror. "Did you honestly believe you could use my old college social security number to take out a $150,000 loan without triggering a massive security flag?" Chantal stumbled back until her shoulders hit the wall. "You found out," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Of course I found out," I replied, stepping closer to them. "I froze my credit yesterday afternoon. The moment you tried to process that application using the country club's public internet network, the bank flagged it as federal identity theft. I did not just decline the loan, I forwarded the IP address and the application details directly to the fraud division of the FBI. Vivian began to hyperventilate. She frantically clutched her chest, her carefully applied makeup starting to sweat. Zora, you have to call them back, she pleaded, her voice jumping an octave. You have to tell them it was a complete misunderstanding. You cannot send the authorities after your own mother. I am a respected elder at the church. They will ruin my reputation. You ruined yourself the moment you tried to steal my identity to pay for a wedding venue you cannot afford, I said coldly. You wanted to protect your image so badly that you committed a felony. Now you can explain it to the federal agents. Chantal was crying now, heavy tears ruining her expensive mascara. You are an absolute monster, Zora. You just destroyed my marriage. I did not destroy anything, I said, putting my phone away. The truth is just finally catching up to you. Before Vivian could formulate another pathetic excuse, the heavy wooden doors of the hallway burst open. The brass handle hit the wall with a loud, aggressive bang. Preston stood in the doorway, his face flushed red, his jaw clenched tight. He was holding his phone in a death grip, glaring at Chantal and Vivian as if he had never seen them before in his life. Preston baby Chantal stammered frantically, wiping her eyes. It is not what it looks like. My sister is just causing trouble. Preston ignored her completely. He held up his phone, his voice echoing loudly in the narrow hallway. Why is the FBI calling my mother's cell phone about a felony fraud investigation linked to my fiancé? Preston stepped fully into the dim mahogany-paneled hallway, pulling the heavy brass handles of the double doors shut behind him to seal us off from the clinking crystal and soft jazz of the main dining room. His aristocratic face, usually arranged in a permanent expression of bored superiority, was contorted with absolute, unbridled rage. He glared at Chantal and Vivian, waiting for an answer to his question, his posture rigid with fury. Chantal was completely paralyzed. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, high-pitched squeak escaped her throat. Her eyes darted wildly between Preston and our mother, searching for a lifeline that did not exist. Preston did not wait for her to find her voice. He stepped closer, towering over her with a menacing presence. My mother is currently having a severe panic attack in the women's restroom, he hissed, his voice vibrating with pure disgust. She received a call from a federal agent 5 minutes ago because she is listed as the primary emergency contact on our wedding venue contract. They informed her that a fraudulent, high-interest loan application was just flagged under your family's IP address. We are a dynasty, Chantal. We are old money. We do not associate with common criminals. Vivian tried to intervene, raising her shaking hands in a desperate, placating gesture. Preston, sweetheart, please lower your voice. Someone might hear you. It is just a massive misunderstanding. I am sure it is a computer glitch or a clerical error. Do not speak to me, Preston snapped, shooting Vivian a look of absolute revulsion. My family's reputation is everything in Charleston. If high society catches wind that my future wife and mother-in-law are currently under federal investigation for identity theft, I will be a laughingstock. This wedding is over. I am calling it off right now. The words hung in the air like a physical strike. Chantal let out a guttural, agonizing sob. The realization that she was losing her wealthy fiancé, her elevated status, and her perfect future shattered her loyalty completely. The polished, dutiful daughter routine she had perfected for 30 years vanished in an instant. Chantal turned on Vivian with a ferocity I had never seen before. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, her voice echoing loudly off the polished wood walls. "You completely ruined my life. Why would you do something so incredibly stupid?" Vivian shrank back, her eyes darting around the hallway like a trapped animal. "I was trying to save your wedding," Vivian cried defensively, clutching her pearl necklace. "Zora canceled the venue. We needed the money immediately to keep Preston's family from knowing the truth about our situation." "Then why did you not just use the family trust fund?" Chantal shrieked, angry tears carving thick tracks through her expensive foundation. "You told me we had a massive safety net. You promised me that the Washington Family Trust Fund was specifically reserved for major life events like this. You could have just wired the $150,000 directly from the trust instead of committing a federal crime. I could not hold it in any longer. I threw my head back and let out a loud, rich laugh that bounced off the ceiling. The sheer delusion of my family was absolutely breathtaking to witness in real time. Chantal whipped her head toward me, her teeth bared like a cornered animal. "Shut up, Zora. This is not funny." "Oh, it is hilarious," I said, reaching into the inner pocket of my custom-tailored crimson suit jacket. I pulled out a thick, neatly folded stack of bank statements and financial records. I had done a comprehensive background check on my own family the moment they started demanding free venues and making strange excuses about their finances. I slapped the stack of papers directly against Chantal's chest, forcing her to grab them before they hit the floor. "There is no trust fund, Chantal," I said, my voice dripping with cold, hard reality. "What trust fund are you talking about? Mom drained that account completely dry 5 years ago." Chantal stared at the top page, her eyes scanning the highlighted zero balances. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in frantic denial. "No, that is impossible. Mom is on the executive board of the church. She drives a brand new Mercedes. We take vacations to Martha's Vineyard." I took a step closer, crowding into her space and pointing at the documents in her trembling hands. "Read the lines, Chantal." Mom drained the entire trust fund to buy her position on the church board. She spent $50,000 in donations just to secure a seat at the table. She pays $2,000 a month to lease a Mercedes she does not even own just to keep up appearances with the local alumni chapter. She maxed out 6 different high-limit credit cards, funding your extravagant medical school graduation parties. Vivian is completely broke. She has been living on fumes, payday loans, and minimum payments for half a decade. Vivian buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud wail of sheer humiliation. She crumpled against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor in her expensive evening gown. The facade she had spent her entire adult life building was officially demolished. The image of black excellence she constantly weaponized against me was nothing but a hollow shell of crippling debt and pathetic lies. Preston watched the entire exchange with a look of absolute horror. He literally took a step back, brushing his jacket as if my mother and sister were carrying a highly contagious disease. He looked at Chantal like she was a piece of garbage stuck to the bottom of his Italian leather loafers. "You people are pathetic frauds," Preston sneered, his upper lip curling in pure disgust. "You pretended to be our equals. You acted like you belonged in our exclusive social circle, and you are nothing but broke, desperate social climbers trying to steal my family's wealth. I am done. I am completely done with this circus." Preston reached into the breast pocket of his navy blazer and pulled out his mobile phone, along with a sleek, heavy black metal credit card. "I am calling the caterer right now," he announced, his voice loud and authoritative. "I am canceling the $50,000 imported seafood and champagne order I placed for the reception. I am cutting my losses, getting my money back, and flying home tonight. You can all rot in federal prison for all I care." He began dialing the number, his thumb tapping the glass screen aggressively. I watched him for a second, admiring the sharp cut of my suit in the reflection of a hallway mirror, before turning my attention back to the arrogant man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. "Do not bother making that call, Preston," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the hallway. He paused, glaring at me with narrow, furious eyes. "Excuse me." I smiled casually, folding my arms across my chest. I said, "Do not bother calling the caterer to get your money back. Chef Marcus is a very close personal friend of mine in the hospitality industry. He actually called me 10 minutes ago asking for professional advice." Preston stood frozen, the heavy black credit card gleaming in his hand. Advice about what he demanded. I looked directly into his eyes and delivered the final blow. "Advice on how to handle a high-profile client whose payment just bounced. Your precious black card was declined for insufficient funds, Preston." Preston's face went from pale to a violently bright shade of crimson. The heavy metal credit card slipped from his trembling grip, clattering against the polished marble floor. He scrambled to pick it up, his aristocratic poise completely dissolving into frantic, uncoordinated movements. "That is an absolute lie," he sputtered, his voice cracking under the weight of sudden panic. "It is a routine security hold. My wealth management team places strict daily limits on my accounts to prevent fraud. Chef Marcus simply ran the charge incorrectly because he is incompetent. I will have my father's personal banking liaison fire him by tomorrow morning." I slowly shook my head, marveling at the sheer volume of delusion crammed into one poorly lit hallway. I reached into the sleek leather portfolio tucked under my arm and pulled out my iPad. "There is no wealth management team, Preston," I said, tapping the screen to wake it up. "There is no security hold. And there certainly is no old money shielding you from reality." I pulled up a highly secured digital file marked with the bold Z Holdings logo. When my sister submitted the venue application to the Montgomery estate, I personally signed on as the hidden guarantor to approve the 100% family discount. My corporate legal team requires comprehensive background checks on all major event contracts to prevent liability. Naturally, we ran a deep dive on the groom. Preston lunged forward, trying to slap the tablet out of my hands. "You have no right to look into my private affairs. That is highly illegal." I sidestepped him effortlessly, letting his own momentum carry him into the mahogany-paneled wall. "Public financial records are fair game, Preston, and yours are a truly fascinating read." I looked down at the glowing screen, projecting my voice so every single word echoed clearly in the enclosed space. "Let us talk about the prestigious Charleston dynasty you brag about. Your family filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 2012 after your father lost everything in a massive commercial real estate scandal. Your childhood estate was foreclosed on and sold at public auction. This exclusive whites-only country club we are standing in right now. The membership belongs entirely to your Uncle Richard, who only lets you host events here out of sheer pity." Chantal let out a ragged gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. She looked at Preston, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to call me a liar and defend his family honor. But Preston was staring at the floor, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were stark white. He had absolutely nothing to say. His silence was the loudest confession possible. "It gets better." I continued swiping to the next page of the investigative report. "Chantal, your perfect aristocratic fiancé does not even have a real job. That fancy vice president title he flaunts on social media and at our family dinners. It is an unpaid internship at a boutique firm owned by his former college roommate's father. He brings home exactly $0 a month. The vintage Rolex on his wrist is a cheap replica, and the luxury sedan he drives is leased under his mother's name." "You are a liar!" Chantal screamed, stepping toward me with wild, desperate eyes. "Preston has massive trust funds. He showed me the financial portfolios. He showed me the stock options. He showed you expertly forged documents." I fired back, pulling up the final piece of evidence and turning the screen so she could see the undeniable proof. "The only thing Preston has to his name is a mountain of crushing, highly illegal debt. He owes over $200,000 to underground sports betting syndicates. The kind of aggressive creditors who break legs when they do not get paid on time. He targeted you, Chantal. He saw a successful, high-earning black physician who was desperate for social validation and a diamond ring. You were his ultimate meal ticket. He planned to use your doctor's salary to quietly pay off his gambling debts while maintaining the grand illusion of his inherited wealth." The absolute horror settling over Chantal's face was deeply tragic to watch. The man she had proudly paraded around as her ultimate prize, the wealthy savior she thought would elevate her social status and solidify her image of elite perfection, was actually a broke, desperate leech. He was using her. He was planning to drain her hard-earned income to save his own skin. She had cruelly alienated her only sister, destroyed her own family's financial stability, and bent over backward to impress a family of bankrupt frauds. The profound weight of her own shallow choices crashed down on her all at once. Chantal realized she had traded her own flesh and blood for a man who viewed her as nothing more than a highly profitable bank account. The prestige she thought she was marrying into was nothing but a mirage designed to trap her. I looked down at Vivian, who was still sitting on the marble floor, surrounded by the shattered pieces of her fake reality. Her own daughter was engaged to a dangerous con artist. Her own finances were completely ruined by her lifelong obsession with superficial appearances. The luxury wedding venue was definitively canceled. The expensive caterer was unpaid and thoroughly insulted. The flawless facade of black excellence she had worshipped her entire life was dead and buried right here in this hallway. Any normal mother would have stood up, slapped the man who tried to ruin her daughter, and dragged her child to safety. Instead of offering her oldest daughter comfort or protection, Vivian did the most unimaginably toxic thing possible. She scrambled up onto her knees, her heavy jewelry clanking together, as she crawled across the cold marble floor and grabbed the hem of Chantal's expensive designer dress. Her eyes were wide and crazed, completely devoid of any genuine maternal instinct. She was breathing heavily, her mind clearly prioritizing the opinions of the local elite over the actual safety and future of her own flesh and blood. "You cannot cancel the wedding," Vivian begged, her voice a hysterical, high-pitched screech that made my skin crawl. "The entire church congregation is coming tomorrow. The country club board is invited. Chantal, you must walk down that aisle. Just marry him tomorrow and quietly divorce him after the holidays. We must save face." Preston stared at Vivian as if she had just suggested he drink poison. "Marry a woman with a broke family and a pending federal fraud investigation?" he scoffed, brushing an invisible speck of dust off his lapel with trembling fingers. "I would rather fake my own death. You are completely delusional if you think I am walking down that aisle." But Chantal's eyes suddenly lit up with a dark, calculating glint. Her vanity and desperation were a toxic combination, instantly overriding whatever shred of dignity she had left. "Wait," she snapped, pulling herself up from the wall and smoothing down the front of her designer dress. "Mom is actually right. We cannot cancel this wedding today. Preston, if you cancel right now, your underground creditors will know you have lost your primary funding source. They will know the wedding is off, and they will come for you the second the cancellation goes public. You do not have the money to run." Preston froze. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "And if I cancel?" Chantal continued, her voice dropping to a frantic, conspiratorial whisper. "My entire medical career and social standing will be destroyed. We will be the laughingstock of the city. We will both be completely ruined. But look at our guest list. We have 400 of the wealthiest people in Charleston and Atlanta attending tomorrow. We have orthopedic surgeons, massive real estate developers, your uncle's rich country club friends, and my entire Alpha Kappa Alpha alumni chapter. They are all bringing gifts. High-end, extremely expensive gifts." Preston slowly lowered his hands, the gears rapidly turning in his head. "Where exactly are you going with this?" he asked cautiously, his tone shifting from disgusted to intrigued. "We changed the registry," Chantal said, her eyes wide and manic with desperate greed. "We send out a blast message telling everyone it is a new cultural tradition to bring cash envelopes instead of boxed gifts. 400 wealthy guests giving a minimum of $1,000 each. That is $400,000 in untraceable cash. We collect the envelopes at the door, pay off your gambling syndicates, immediately cover my mother's fraudulent loan. So the federal agents drop the case, and we split whatever is left over. We play the happy couple for exactly 6 months, then we quietly file for an amicable divorce citing irreconcilable differences." I stood perfectly still, watching this monstrous negotiation unfold in real time. My stomach churned with a sickening wave of pure nausea. They were not just ignoring the federal crime my mother had committed. They were actively plotting to scam hundreds of their own friends, colleagues, and church members to cover up their mutual financial ruin. Vivian clasped her hands together in prayer, tears of relief streaking her heavy makeup. "Oh, praise the Lord," she wept, looking up at the ceiling as if she had just received divine intervention. "Yes, this is the perfect solution. We keep our dignity, we pay the debts, and nobody ever has to know the truth. Our reputation remains completely spotless." Preston looked at Chantal, his aristocratic sneer replaced by a predatory, hungry grin. A cash grab, he murmured, nodding slowly as he calculated the payout. It is incredibly tacky, but it solves the immediate cash flow problem. We smile for the cameras, secure the envelopes, and walk away clean. I felt a literal shiver of revulsion travel down my spine. I had expected them to turn on each other, to scream and cry and face the devastating consequences of their actions. I never imagined they would sink to the absolute lowest level of forming a criminal syndicate right in front of me. "You are all entirely out of your minds," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper that cut through their frantic scheming. "You are standing in the hallway of an exclusive country club, plotting a massive financial scam to cover up a federal felony and illegal underground gambling debts. You are going to rob the people who love you. You have absolutely no morals, no shame, and no souls." Chantal shot me a venomous glare, stepping forward with her chin held high. "You do not understand how the real world works, Zora. This is about survival and protecting our family legacy. You can leave now. We do not need your help, and we certainly do not need your judgment." "You never had my help," I replied, turning on my heel. I adjusted the cuffs of my Tom Ford jacket and looked back at them one last time. The three of them stood huddled together, a pathetic tableau of fake wealth and desperate lies. "I hope you enjoy the wedding, Chantal. You and Preston truly deserve each other." Without another word, I pushed open the heavy brass doors and walked out of the country club, leaving them to their toxic delusions. By the time I reached my car and handed my ticket to the valet, Chantal was already executing her desperate plan. My phone buzzed with an urgent mass text message sent to the entire wedding guest list. I opened it and read the frantic, thinly veiled plea for money. "Dearest friends and family," the text read, accompanied by a glittering digital engagement photo. "Preston and I are so thrilled to celebrate our union with you tomorrow. In lieu of traditional boxed gifts, we are honoring a beautiful new modern custom. We kindly request that all gifts be presented as cash in sealed envelopes, which will be collected by our private security team at the main entrance of the Montgomery estate. We cannot wait to see you all." I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and started the engine. She actually did it. She was trying to shake down her entire congregation, her medical colleagues, and her sorority sisters to pay for a groom who was essentially holding her hostage. It was a spectacular display of unchecked vanity. The next morning dawned bright and clear, offering the perfect weather for a high-society Charleston wedding. At exactly 10 o'clock, a massive, gleaming white rented limousine turned off the main highway and began its approach down the long, beautiful oak-lined driveway leading to the Montgomery estate. Inside the limo, Chantal was wearing a custom-imported silk gown that cost more than a standard down payment on a house. Vivian was draped in heavy gold jewelry, her hair perfectly styled to impress the wealthy church elders. Preston sat across from them in a bespoke tuxedo, mentally calculating the hundreds of cash envelopes they were about to collect from their unsuspecting guests. They were ready to execute their grand scam, completely convinced they had outsmarted the universe and secured their fake aristocratic status forever. But as the long white limousine rounded the final bend and approached the grand entrance of the venue, the driver abruptly slammed on the brakes. The heavy tires skidded violently against the gravel, throwing Chantal forward and spilling Preston's expensive champagne directly across his lap. "What are you doing?" Chantal shrieked, frantically clutching her delicate veil to keep it from tearing. "Drive through the gates right now. The guests are going to start arriving any minute." The driver lowered the privacy partition, his eyes wide with confusion in the rearview mirror. "I cannot drive through, ma'am. The entrance is completely blocked." Chantal, Preston, and Vivian scrambled across the leather seats to look out the tinted windows. The blood instantly drained from their faces, leaving them looking like absolute ghosts. The towering, beautiful wrought iron gates of the Montgomery estate were not thrown wide open to welcome the elite crowd of Charleston society. Instead, the massive gates were pulled tightly shut and wrapped in thick, heavy steel chains secured by three enormous industrial-grade padlocks. Standing directly in front of the chained gates were four heavily armed private security guards wearing dark tactical vests. They stood with their arms crossed, glaring intimidatingly at the rented limousine. In the center of the iron gates hung a massive bright red sign with bold white lettering. Venue cancelled by order of guarantor. No trespassing, violators will be arrested. Violators will. The red sign hung there like a massive, humiliating stop sign to Chantal's entire fake reality. Behind their idling white limousine, a glittering parade of luxury vehicles was already piling up along the narrow, oak-lined country road. Hundreds of Charleston's self-proclaimed elite were trapped in a rapidly escalating traffic jam. There were prominent orthopedic surgeons in tailored suits, ruthless real estate developers, and perfectly coiffed church elders all sitting in gridlock. Horns began to blare impatiently, shattering the serene morning air of the southern countryside. The temperature was rising, and the pristine guests were completely cut off from the air-conditioned luxury of the venue they had been promised. Preston stared out the tinted window, his jaw hanging open, as the reality of the chained gates fully set in. This was not a clerical error. This was absolute, inescapable ruin. Chantal kicked the limousine door open completely, ignoring her mother's frantic, tearful pleas to stay hidden inside the vehicle. She practically threw herself onto the gravel driveway, her $15,000 imported silk gown dragging heavily through the dirt and dead leaves. She sprinted toward the towering iron gates, the heavy layers of tulle and lace making her look like a frantic, desperate bird. "Open these gates immediately," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria as she grabbed the thick steel chains and rattled them with all her might. "I am the bride. I am Dr. Chantal Washington, and you are ruining my wedding. Do you know who I am? I demand to speak to the manager of this estate right now. Unlock this gate before I sue everyone on this property." The 4 private security guards did not flinch. They stood like immovable stone statues, their hands resting comfortably near their tactical belts, their faces completely hidden behind dark sunglasses. They offered absolutely zero response, letting Chantal's frantic shrieks echo uselessly against the heavy iron bars. Her flawless bridal makeup began to run as hot tears of panic spilled down her cheeks. She banged her fists against the cold metal, screaming that she had 400 elite guests waiting on the road and that heads would roll for this massive disrespect. She demanded access to her own wedding, completely blind to the fact that her name was not the one on the ultimate contract. The commotion at the front of the line was simply too much for the impatient high society crowd to ignore. Car doors began to open one by one. Guests stepped out of their idling Mercedes Range Rovers and BMWs to see exactly what was causing the massive delay. Within seconds, smartphones were pulled out and aimed directly at the gates. The younger guests, Chantal's own supposedly loyal sorority sisters and hospital colleagues, instantly went live on Instagram and TikTok, broadcasting the disastrous, humiliating meltdown to the entire city in high definition. Preston's mother, Eleanor, emerged from a silver Bentley, exactly 3 cars back. She adjusted her wide-brimmed designer hat and surveyed the locked gates with open, mocking disgust. "This is exactly what happens when you associate with incompetent, low-class people," Eleanor declared loudly, ensuring her shrill, condescending voice carried easily over the murmurs of the crowd. "I told Preston this entire affair was a horrible mistake. They cannot even secure a proper venue. Yet they have the absolute audacity to send out a mass text message asking us for cash envelopes like common street beggars. I have never been so insulted in my life." Vivian stumbled out of the limousine just in time to hear Eleanor's brutal, unfiltered commentary. Her legs gave out completely beneath her. She clutched the side of the white vehicle, sliding down until her knees hit the gravel. Her chest heaved in a full-blown panic attack as she realized exactly who was watching her downfall. The senior members of her church congregation, the very women she had spent decades trying to outshine, intimidate, and impress, were standing just yards away. They were pointing directly at the bright red canceled sign, whispering fiercely behind their manicured hands. Their eyes were filled with thinly veiled delight at Vivian's highly public destruction. Sister Vivian certainly overstepped her blessings. This time, one prominent church elder muttered, her voice loud enough for the entire front row of guests to hear clearly. "Asking us for envelopes of cash at the door like a nightclub cover charge, and they do not even have the keys to the building. What an absolute disgrace." The untraceable cash envelopes they so desperately needed to cover their massive fraudulent debts and illegal gambling syndicates were still tucked safely inside the suit pockets and designer purses of the guests. The grand scam had died right here at the gates. There would be no payoff. There would be no saving face in front of the congregation. There was only the brutal, inescapable reality of total social and financial destruction captured from dozens of angles and live-streamed to thousands of eager viewers. Chantal spun around, realizing she was entirely surrounded by camera lenses, whispering lips, and judging eyes. She backed up against the chained gates, looking exactly like a trapped animal, hyperventilating as the suffocating weight of her absolute ruin finally crushed her. Just as the chaos reached a fever pitch, a low, powerful engine purr cut through the sound of honking horns and frantic whispers. A sleek custom black Maybach glided smoothly past the mile-long line of stalled luxury cars, taking the reserved emergency lane specifically meant for venue staff. The sheer imposing presence of the massive vehicle commanded instant silence. The whispering stopped entirely. The glowing phone screens pivoted in unison to capture the new arrival. The Maybach pulled to a slow, deliberate halt directly in front of the locked iron gates, positioning itself squarely between the panicked bridal party and the impenetrable wall of tactical security guards. The tinted driver's side door opened, and a uniformed chauffeur stepped out. He walked around the hood of the vehicle with crisp, practiced precision to open the heavy rear passenger door. The elite crowd completely parted, holding their collective breath as they waited to see who commanded such authority. I stepped out of the Maybach, the bright morning sun instantly catching the bold, razor-sharp cut of my custom-tailored crimson Tom Ford suit. I casually adjusted my cuffs, my heels crunching softly against the gravel as I took in the magnificent disaster unfolding before me. I looked at Vivian, hyperventilating by the limo, Preston hiding like a coward in the back seat, and Chantal weeping pathetically against the padlocked gates. I lifted my chin and offered them a cold, brilliant, unapologetic smile. The silence that fell over the country road was absolute. The idling engines of dozens of luxury cars seemed to hum loudly in the background as every single eye locked onto me. I adjusted the pristine lapels of my crimson jacket, completely unbothered by the collective stare of Charleston's supposed elite. My heels clicked with a rhythmic, measured cadence against the asphalt as I bypassed the mile-long traffic jam and walked directly toward the heavily fortified iron gates. Chantal suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed, tearful state. The sight of me standing there looking like power personified completely short-circuited whatever logic she had left in her panicked brain. In her desperate, warped mind, I was still the uneducated scapegoat. I was still the lowly, embarrassing event planner she could order around to clean up her messes. She grabbed the massive, heavy skirts of her $15,000 silk gown, hoisted the excessive fabric to her knees, and charged directly at me like a raging bull. Gravel flew under her frantic footsteps as she stomped toward the barricade. Her veil dragged pathetically through the dirt. "What are you doing here?" she screamed, her face flushed with a mixture of blinding rage and total panic. Her voice cracked, echoing loudly in the dead quiet of the morning. "Tell these guards you know me. Tell them I am the bride and get them to open the venue right now. We have hundreds of important people waiting on this road, and I am not going to be humiliated because of some stupid clerical error. Fix this, Zora. Fix it immediately." She reached out with her manicured hands, fully intending to grab my arm and drag me toward the barricade to do her bidding. I sidestepped her with effortless grace, letting her own reckless momentum carry her forward until she stumbled awkwardly in her heavy restrictive dress. I did not even grant her the dignity of a glance. I completely ignored her frantic, shrieking demands, bypassing her entirely as I walked straight up to the impenetrable wall of tactical security blocking the estate. I stopped a few feet from the imposing iron bars, looking directly at the lead guard. "Good morning, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly and calmly through the crisp morning air. "Are the grounds secure?" The towering, heavily armed guard immediately dropped his intimidating stance. He uncrossed his arms, straightened his posture into strict military attention, and offered a sharp, deeply respectful nod. "Yes, Madam CEO," Marcus replied, his deep voice projecting easily over the murmurs of the stunned crowd. We locked down the perimeter at 0600 hours. No unauthorized access. A collective sharp intake of breath rippled through the gathered crowd. The words "Madam CEO" hit the air like a physical shockwave. The wealthy doctors, the snobbish country club members, the highly judgmental church elders. They all went completely painfully silent. You could hear the wind rustling through the Spanish moss hanging from the ancient oak trees. Preston's mother, Eleanor, who was standing just a few yards away in her designer hat, actually dropped her expensive clutch. It hit the pavement with a dull thud, but she did not even look down. She was too busy staring at me with her mouth hanging open, her pale face draining of all remaining color. I turned slowly away from the chained gates and faced the massive crowd of idling cars and bewildered high society guests. I swept my gaze over the sea of pastel suits and expensive fascinators, projecting my voice with absolute unwavering authority. "Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Montgomery estate," I announced, ensuring every single syllable was crisp, clear, and commanding. "I am Zora, the CEO of Z Holdings and the sole owner of this property." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Loud gasps erupted from the front of the line and carried all the way down the rural road. The church elders, who had been fiercely mocking my mother mere moments ago, were now staring at me with wide, fearful eyes, rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew about the Washington family. Preston, still lingering near the white limousine, looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. He finally realized that the woman he had just tried to scam was the very billionaire who owned the ground he was standing on. Vivian let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. She clutched her chest dramatically, her heavily jeweled hands pressing against her pearl necklace as if she were actively suffering a massive cardiac event. She staggered backward, hitting the side of the rented limousine, utterly unable to process the words coming out of my mouth. Her entire reality, built on the desperate lie that she was infinitely better than me, was crumbling into dust right in front of her prestigious congregation. She had banished her own daughter for being a failure, only to discover that daughter was the most powerful person in the city. Chantal was practically vibrating with shock. She stumbled toward me, her eyes darting frantically between my custom-tailored suit, the heavily armed guards waiting on my command, and the magnificent sprawling estate sitting behind the iron bars. Her brain simply could not comprehend the magnitude of her own ignorance. "You own this," Chantal stammers, her voice dropping to a trembling, pathetic squeak. Her hands shook violently as she pointed at the multi-million-dollar property behind me. "But you plan cheap parties. You work in community centers. You arrange discount flowers. You are just a broke event planner." I looked down at my older sister, watching her desperately struggle to hold on to the pathetic superiority she had weaponized against me her entire life. I let a slow, dangerous, incredibly satisfying smirk spread across my face. "I do not plan cheap parties, Chantal," I said, my voice dripping with cold, hard reality. "I own the venues, I own the catering conglomerates, I own the floral distribution centers. I built an entire hospitality empire from the ground up while you and Mom were busy maxing out high-interest credit cards to buy fake prestige." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, forcing her to shrink back under the sheer weight of my presence. I looked past her to where Preston and Vivian were cowering by the limousine, ensuring my final words echoed clearly for the entire crowd to hear. And as the owner, I continued, my eyes locking dead onto hers. "I reserve the absolute right to cancel any event that fails to pay its balance." Eleanor stepped forward, her face mottled with a furious, indignant red. She shoved her way past a cluster of stunned bridesmaids, her expensive designer heels stabbing the gravel. "You listen to me right now," young Lady Eleanor barked, waving a manicured finger directly in my face. "I do not care what kind of petty sibling rivalry you have going on here. My family is an aristocratic institution in this city. We are the Charleston elite. We have governors and state judges sitting in those cars waiting to attend my son's wedding. You will open these gates immediately, or I will have this property seized and your little business destroyed by Monday morning." I looked at Eleanor, feeling nothing but profound pity for a woman drowning in her own delusions. I folded my arms behind my back and offered her a smile made of pure ice. Your family is a bankrupt shell, Eleanor. Your husband lost every penny in a commercial real estate scandal 12 years ago. Your son is deeply in debt to an underground sports betting syndicate. He has an unpaid internship, wears a fake Rolex, and drives a luxury sedan leased under your name because his credit score is utterly non-existent. The only reason Preston is even standing here today is because he was planning to use my sister's medical salary to save you both from complete financial ruin. So please save the aristocratic threats for someone who has not read your comprehensive financial background report. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat as if I had physically struck her across the face. She looked around frantically, but there were no allies to be found. The prominent guests standing nearby had heard every single word. The whispering intensified, shifting rapidly from shock to vicious, judgmental gossip. Eleanor spun around and retreated into the crowd, her head bowed, her fake elite status completely annihilated in front of the very people she sought to impress. Marcus stepped forward and silently handed me a sleek, black wireless microphone. I turned it on, the sharp feedback echoing over the estate walls and commanding the absolute attention of every single person trapped on that country road. I looked out over the sea of luxury vehicles and deeply confused guests. 5 days ago, I said, my amplified voice ringing with undeniable authority. 5 days ago, my own sister uninvited me from this very wedding. She stood in my living room and told me that I was not real family. She told me I was a social embarrassment, a failure who planned cheap parties, and that my mere presence would ruin her elite aesthetic. She banished me because she believed I was too poor to stand next to her high society friends. I pulled my smartphone from my inside jacket pocket, unlocking the screen with a swift swipe. But Chantal did not just uninvite me in person. She wanted to make absolutely sure I felt the full weight of her disgust. She put her profound malice in writing. Let us read the receipts, shall we? I held the phone up, staring directly at Chantal, who was now sobbing hysterically and shaking her head, begging me silently to stop. I did not stop. Message 1. I read aloud, my voice echoing like thunder across the expansive driveway. Zora, do not bother showing up on Saturday. Preston's family is old money, and having a broke single event planner as my sister makes me look incredibly bad. You are a complete failure. Stay away from my new life. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw a group of women wearing the signature pink and green colors of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. They were Chantal's line sisters, women who prided themselves on lifelong sisterhood and solidarity. Their jaws were practically on the floor. Their eyes darted toward Chantal with absolute unfiltered disgust. Message 2. I continued swiping to the next text on my screen. I am marrying into a dynasty, Zora. I cannot have you embarrassing me in front of prominent doctors and real estate tycoons. You are socially unfit for my wedding. I am finally getting the prestige I deserve, and I will not let your pathetic life drag me down. The church elders, women who had watched Chantal grow up in their congregation, began shaking their heads in sheer horror. One of the senior mothers clutched her Bible tightly to her chest, openly glaring at Chantal. The sheer cruelty of those text messages completely shattered the flawless Christian woman facade Chantal had spent years carefully cultivating. She was entirely exposed as a vain, cruel, and desperately shallow fraud who would trample her own flesh and blood for a taste of high society status. Please stop! Chantal whimpered, sinking to her knees in the gravel. Her massive silk dress pooled around her like a deflated parachute, instantly ruined by the dirt. She buried her face in her hands, unable to look at the hundreds of people who were actively watching her world burn to the ground. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every agonizing second of her humiliation. This is a total misunderstanding, a shrill, panicked voice screamed. Vivian scrambled forward, pushing her way to the front of the locked gates. Her heavy gold jewelry clanked together as she waved her arms frantically, desperately trying to play the victim and salvage whatever tiny shred of dignity she had left. She turned to the crowd, her eyes wide and crazed, sweat visibly beading on her forehead. Do not listen to her, Vivian pleaded, pointing a trembling finger at me. My oldest daughter is lying. She has always been incredibly jealous of Chantal. She is trying to ruin her sister's perfect day out of pure spite. We just had a small billing error with the venue, that is all. A minor clerical mistake that is being blown completely out of proportion by an angry sibling. I lowered the microphone slightly, offering my mother a smile so dangerous it made her instantly freeze in her tracks. A billing error. I asked, my voice deadly calm, yet carrying enough volume to be heard clearly by the entire front row of guests. Or the fact that you tried to commit federal identity theft to forge a $150,000 loan in my name to pay for this charade. The gasps from the crowd were deafening. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land, her perfectly powdered face draining of all remaining color. The murmurs of the elite crowd escalated into a roar of scandalized whispers. Federal identity theft was not just a social faux pas. It was a guaranteed federal prison sentence. The church elders who had previously envied Vivian were now staring at her as if she were carrying the plague. Preston, sensing the absolute finality of the Washington family's destruction, decided it was time to aggressively abandon ship. He took a hasty, panicked step away from Chantal, holding his hands up defensively, as if her sudden proximity might infect him with poverty and a federal indictment. "I have absolutely nothing to do with this," Preston announced loudly, projecting his voice so his uncle's wealthy country club friends could hear him clearly. He aggressively adjusted his bespoke tuxedo jacket, desperately trying to project aristocratic outrage. "I am completely appalled. My family is an institution in Charleston. I had absolutely no idea about the criminal behavior of these people. I am leaving this instant. I must protect my family name from this utter disgrace." He turned on his heel, signaling to his mother Eleanor, who was already nodding vigorously in agreement, and scurrying toward her silver Bentley to escape the fallout. I stepped directly into his path, my custom heels planting firmly on the asphalt. The tactical security guards shifted silently behind me, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle that halted Preston's escape route immediately. "Going somewhere, Preston?" I asked, tilting my head with a razor-sharp smile. "Before you leave your desperate bride at the altar to save your precious family name, why do you not explain to your high society friends why your heavy metal credit card for the caterer bounced twice yesterday afternoon?" Preston froze. His arrogant, aristocratic posture crumbled instantly. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice dropping an octave as genuine panic set in. "It was a routine security hold by my wealth management team. You have no right to discuss my private finances." "There is no wealth management team." "Preston," I said, projecting my amplified voice, so every single syllable reached the eager ears of his horrified relatives and snobby friends. "There is only a mountain of crushing highly illegal debt. Let us talk about your prestigious family name. Your father lost every single penny in a massive commercial real estate scandal in 2012. Your family filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Your childhood estate was foreclosed on and sold at public auction. This exclusive old money lifestyle you constantly flaunt is completely funded by your Uncle Richard, who merely tolerates you out of sheer pity." Eleanor let out a strangled, agonizing wail. She grabbed the wide brim of her designer hat and yanked it down over her face, completely humiliated as the very people she had been insulting mere minutes ago turned their ruthless, judgmental glares onto her. The elite crowd realized instantly that she had been faking her wealth for over a decade. Her snobbish critiques of everyone else were nothing but a desperate smokescreen to hide her own absolute bankruptcy. She covered her face in burning shame, shrinking back against the hood of her borrowed car. I did not stop. I pulled up the digital background check on my phone and continued reading. "And let us talk about you, Preston. You do not have massive trust funds. Your fancy vice president title is an unpaid internship at a boutique firm owned by your college roommate's father. The vintage Rolex on your wrist is a cheap replica. Your luxury sedan is leased under your mother's name because your credit score is effectively zero." Preston was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly for an exit that simply did not exist. "But the absolute worst part, I said, taking one step closer so he could see the utter contempt burning in my eyes, is your $200,000 debt to an underground sports betting syndicate. You are in deep with aggressive creditors who break legs when they do not get paid on time. You needed Chantal's doctor salary to save your own skin. You plan to use this entire wedding charade to quietly pay off your illegal debts while maintaining the grand illusion of your inherited wealth. Chantal looked like she had been struck by a runaway freight train. The man she had proudly paraded around as her ultimate prize, the wealthy savior she thought would elevate her social status and solidify her image of elite perfection, was actually a broke, desperate leech. He was using her. The prestige she thought she was marrying into was nothing but a calculated mirage designed to trap her into paying his gambling markers. "You are broke!" Chantal screamed, her voice shattering the morning tension. "You lied to me! You let me alienate my own sister and ruin my mother's entire financial future for you!" Preston finally snapped. The polished aristocratic facade completely shattered, revealing the pathetic cornered rat underneath. The humiliation of being exposed in front of his uncle's country club friends pushed him right over the edge. He turned on Chantal with vicious, unhinged fury. "Of course I lied, you shallow idiot," Preston roared, his face turning a violent shade of purple as spittle flew from his lips. "Do you think I actually wanted to marry you? You are a desperate social climbing joke. I just needed a quick cash infusion to keep my kneecaps from being broken. You were supposed to be my ticket out of debt. You are nothing but a highly profitable bank account to me." Chantal's face contorted with a rage so pure and feral it practically radiated heat. She lunged forward, raising her hand high, and delivered a blindingly fast, open-palmed slap directly across Preston's cheek. The sound cracked through the crisp morning air like a gunshot echoing loudly against the locked iron gates. Preston stumbled backward, holding his stinging cheek in pure shock. "You crazy witch!" he yelled, balling his hands into fists and lunging right back at her. Before anyone in the stunned crowd could react, a full-blown brawl broke out between the bride and groom right in front of the locked iron gates of the Montgomery estate. Chantal grabbed Preston by the lapels of his bespoke tuxedo, shoving him backward into the loose gravel. Preston scrambled to maintain his balance, grabbing a fistful of Chantal's $15,000 imported silk gown and ripping the delicate tulle right down the seam. They grappled like wild animals in the dirt, tearing at each other's expensive clothes and screaming vicious insults, while hundreds of elite guests gladly recorded the spectacular, undeniable destruction of Charleston's most anticipated wedding. Preston shoved Chantal backward with a guttural, frantic yell, tearing his ruined lapel completely out of her tight grip. His carefully groomed hair was matted with sweat and dirt, and a bright red, throbbing handprint blossomed angrily across his aristocratic cheek. The polished veneer of the Charleston elite had evaporated entirely, leaving behind a terrified, cornered con artist. He stumbled toward his least luxury sedan, practically diving over the center console to reach the driver's seat. He did not even bother to look back at his mother. Eleanor was still cowering near the bumper of her silver Bentley, shouting his name in a shrill, panicked voice, but Preston completely ignored her. He slammed the car into gear with a violent jerk. The heavy tires spun wildly, kicking up a massive, blinding cloud of dust and sharp gravel that pelted the front row of stunned wedding guests. He was fleeing the scene, absolutely terrified of the underground betting syndicate that would inevitably come to collect their pound of flesh, now that his highly profitable cash cow was publicly slaughtered. The sleek black sedan swerved erratically down the shoulder of the oak-lined road, sideswiping a meticulously manicured hedge before disappearing completely around the bend. Chantal's grand lifelong illusion of ascending into old money white wealth vanished in the dark exhaust fumes of a leased car driven by a bankrupt fraud. Chantal was left kneeling alone in the dirt, her chest heaving violently as she stared at the empty space where her wealthy savior had just been. Slowly, agonizingly, she turned her head to face her captive audience. Hundreds of elite guests, the prominent orthopedic surgeons she worked alongside, the wealthy church elders she had sought to intimidate. and her supposedly loyal sorority sisters were completely, brutally silent. They were not looking at her with the envy or admiration she so desperately craved. They were looking at her with profound, unadulterated pity and intense disgust. Every single smartphone was aimed directly at her tear-streaked, dirt-smudged face. The flawless narrative of black excellence she had weaponized against me her entire life was definitively dead. She had cruelly alienated her own blood, destroyed her family's financial future, and committed a federal crime for a man who viewed her as nothing more than a desperate, easily manipulated mark. Vivian was still slumped against the tires of the white limousine, hyperventilating into a brown paper bag provided by the stunned valet driver. She was completely useless and utterly defeated by the spectacular collapse of her own shallow kingdom. The crushing weight of her highly public humiliation finally broke through Chantal's impenetrable wall of vanity. She looked at the padlocked iron gates of the Montgomery estate, the towering symbol of the ultimate success she thought she was stealing, and then she looked up at me. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees like a desperate beggar. The jagged gravel tore mercilessly into the delicate, intricate layers of her $15,000 imported silk gown. The pristine white fabric eagerly absorbed the dark, wet mud, transforming her bridal masterpiece into a filthy, ruined rag. She did not care about the dress anymore. She dragged herself right to the polished tips of my custom-tailored shoes, her heavy bridal veil snagging on a rogue branch and ripping cleanly down the middle. "Zora, please." Chantal sobbed, her voice a ragged, desperate rasp that broke pathetically over the quiet, judging crowd. "I am sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I was jealous of you. I was always so intensely jealous of how easily you succeeded while I had to fake everything. I am begging you, Zora. Just tell the guards to open the gates. Let me have the reception inside. The caterers are already in there preparing the food. We can just pretend the wedding happened. I cannot face this intense humiliation. Please do not leave me out here in the dirt like this. I will do whatever you want. I will pay you back every single penny. Just let me inside the gates." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman clutching frantically at the hem of my crimson trousers. I searched myself for a tiny shred of sisterly affection, a single drop of empathy, or even a basic sense of familial obligation. I found absolutely nothing. Her tears were not born of genuine remorse for the devastating crimes she and Vivian had committed. She was only crying because her elaborate scam had been exposed, and her precious social standing was permanently annihilated in front of the exact people she worshipped. She was bargaining, treating my multi-million-dollar venue like a cheap rental she could barter for with fake tears. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, removing myself cleanly from her desperate, muddy grasp. I adjusted the lapels of my jacket and stared down at her with lethal, unwavering politeness. "You wanted real family only." "Chantal," I said, my voice ringing with icy, unforgiving finality over the silent crowd. "5 days ago, you made it abundantly clear that I did not fit your elite aesthetic. You banished me because I was a social liability. But real family does not steal. Real family does not commit federal identity theft to forge a $150,000 loan in my name to pay for a fraudulent charade. You made your choice, and the gates stay closed." Chantal opened her mouth to scream, her face contorting into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated anguish, as the absolute finality of my words struck her. But before a single sound could escape her throat, a new noise shattered the tense morning air. It started as a distant, high-pitched wail, rapidly multiplying and echoing wildly through the sprawling Spanish moss. Everyone in the crowd froze, turning their heads simultaneously toward the main highway. The unmistakable, piercing shriek of multiple police sirens cut through the rural quiet, approaching the Montgomery estate at terrifying speed. The wail of the sirens grew deafening as 3 heavy-duty police cruisers crested the hill, their red and blue lights slicing frantically through the thick dust cloud Preston had left behind. The luxury cars lining the road hastily pulled onto the grassy shoulders, creating a makeshift path for the authorities. Gravel crunched violently under the heavy tires as the cruisers braked in a synchronized angled formation right in front of the locked iron gates. Vivian snapped her head toward the flashing lights, her panic instantly morphing into profound, triumphant relief. She scrambled up from her slump against the limousine tire, frantically smoothing down the front of her wrinkled silk suit. She patted her hair, attempting to reconstruct her pristine matriarchal image, and marched directly toward the lead cruiser with an air of absolute entitlement. "Officer, thank God you are here!" Vivian shouted, her voice shrill and dripping with righteous indignation. She pointed a manicured, jewel-encrusted finger directly at my chest. "Arrest this woman immediately. She is illegally locking us out of our reserved venue. She is trespassing, causing a massive public disturbance, and ruining my daughter's perfect wedding. I want her in handcuffs right this second. Remove her from this property so we can proceed." 4 heavily armed officers stepped out of their vehicles. They did not even glance at the imposing iron gates. They completely ignored my presence, bypassing my tactical security team without a single second thought. The lead detective, a tall man with a stern, weathered face, held a thick manila folder in his hand. His eyes locked onto Vivian with absolute, unwavering focus. He marched straight past the idling limousine, walking directly up to my mother. "Vivian Washington." The detective asked, his voice a flat, authoritative bark that cut through the lingering murmurs of the elite crowd. "Yes," Vivian replied, lifting her chin and adjusting her posture to radiate upper-class superiority. "I am Vivian Washington, and as I just told you, that woman over there is illegally Vivian Washington." The detective interrupted, stepping firmly into her personal space. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, credit card fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Place your hands behind your back." The silence that fell over the country road was absolute. You could hear the faint rustle of the wind in the Spanish moss and the heavy rhythmic breathing of the stunned wedding guests. Vivian froze entirely, her outstretched finger dropping limply to her side. The smug, triumphant sneer melted off her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. What she gasped, stumbling backward until she hit the side of the white limousine. "No. No, you have the wrong person. I am a prominent citizen in this community. I am the mother of the bride. You cannot do this." 2 female officers stepped forward, moving with swift, practiced efficiency. They grabbed Vivian by the arms, spinning her around and forcing her wrists together. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the crisp morning air, sounding exactly like a judge's gavel striking a heavy wooden block. "You cannot do this!" Vivian screamed, her voice cracking as she thrashed against the officer's firm grip. "I am a church elder. I sit on the senior usher board. I run the annual charity drive. I am a woman of God. You are making a terrible mistake. Tell them, Chantal. Tell them who I am." Chantal was still kneeling in the dirt, her torn wedding dress ruined, completely paralyzed by the sight of her mother being shackled like a common criminal. The church ladies in the front row, the same women Vivian had spent decades trying to impress, literally took steps backward, creating a wide circle of isolation around the disgraced matriarch. They looked at her with pure disdain. I watched my mother kick and scream, feeling an overwhelming wave of cold, hard justice wash over me. She was weaponizing her church status, desperately trying to use her religious titles to shield herself from the harsh consequences of her own malice. It was the exact same tactic she had used against me my entire childhood. I stood perfectly still, watching the scene unfold, and I remembered sitting in the front pew of that very church when I was 9 years old. I remembered Vivian leaning over, her pristine smile aimed at the congregation, while her hand reached under my skirt to pinch my thigh hard enough to leave deep purple bruises. She had whispered venom into my ear, telling me that my messy hair and quiet demeanor were an embarrassment to her righteous reputation. She used to tell me that God punished wicked, ungrateful children who made their mothers look bad. She wielded her standing on the elder council as an absolute weapon, forcing me to endure her emotional cruelty in total silence because no one would ever believe a flawed child over a prominent church leader. She had constantly called me a stain on her perfect life. Now she was the stain. She was the one thrashing in the dirt, screaming about her religious titles while federal officers read her Miranda rights. God was certainly punishing someone today, But it was not the ungrateful child. The officers roughly guided Vivian toward the back of the cruiser. She dragged her feet, sobbing uncontrollably, as they pressed a hand to the top of her head and shoved her into the back seat. The heavy door slammed shut, trapping her inside the metal cage. As the reality of the arrests settled over the paralyzed crowd, a sudden violent screech broke the silence. Eleanor Preston's mother emerged from behind her silver Bentley like a deranged banshee. Her designer hat was skewed wildly to the side, and her face was contorted into a mask of pure irrational fury. The public exposure of her family's bankruptcy, the destruction of her son's lucrative scam, and the utter humiliation in front of Charleston's elite had pushed her mind completely past the breaking point. "This is all your fault!" Eleanor shrieked, pointing a shaking hand at me. Her eyes were wide and manic. "You ruined my son! You destroyed my family name! You vindictive, arrogant little brat!" Before anyone could register her intentions, Eleanor charged. She lunged directly at me, her hands raised like claws, fully intending to rip my face apart. She completely ignored the flashing police lights and the heavily armed officers standing mere yards away. In her shattered reality, I was the sole target of her absolute rage. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I stood my ground, my hands folded calmly behind my back. Marcus and the tactical security team moved with terrifying speed. They did not shout warnings. They simply reacted. Two massive guards stepped smoothly into Eleanor's path, intercepting her frantic charge before she could even come within 10 feet of me. One guard grabbed her raised arms while the other swept her legs. They effortlessly tackled the aristocratic woman to the rough gravel. Eleanor hit the ground with a heavy thud, screaming in outrage as the security guards pinned her wrists behind her back. The police officers, having just secured Vivian, immediately spun around and jogged toward the commotion. They witnessed the entire unprovoked attack. The lead detective pulled a second pair of handcuffs from his belt, kneeling in the dirt beside the struggling, screaming society matron, arresting her for aggravated assault right in front of her high society peers. The flashing red and blue lights faded into the distance, carrying my mother and Eleanor away to face federal fraud and aggravated assault charges. The wail of the sirens grew faint, eventually swallowed by the dense Spanish moss and the sprawling ancient oaks lining the rural highway. The heavy cloud of dust, kicked up by Preston's frantic, cowardly escape, finally settled back onto the pavement. The silence that reclaimed the country road was absolute and suffocating. 300 of Charleston's most prominent citizens were left stranded on the asphalt. Governors, state judges, real estate tycoons, and high society matriarchs stood frozen in a collective state of profound shock. They were dressed in bespoke tuxedos and imported silk, clutching velvet-wrapped wedding gifts and silver envelopes stuffed with cash, entirely unsure of what to do next. The grand, aristocratic illusion they had driven an hour out of the city to witness had just violently self-destructed, leaving behind nothing but a muddy crime scene and a mountain of scandalous gossip. At my feet, Chantal remained crumpled in the dirt. She was weeping silently now, a broken, shivering heap of ruined white fabric and shattered delusions. Her manicured hands clawed uselessly at the gravel. She was waiting for someone, anyone, to offer her a hand up. She was waiting for her line sisters to rush forward with tissues and words of comfort. She was waiting for the church elders to pray over her. No one moved. The elite crowd, a group that prized dignity, wealth, and above all else proximity to actual power, looked at her with pure, unadulterated apathy. She was no longer a rising socialite marrying into a dynasty. She was the disgraced daughter of an indicted felon abandoned by a broke gambler. She was entirely irrelevant. I turned away from her pathetic, trembling form and looked out over the sea of luxury vehicles. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the cool morning air fill my lungs. The adrenaline from the confrontation settled into a cool, sharp focus. I raised the wireless microphone to my lips. The crisp hum of the audio system instantly commanded the attention of every single person present. All eyes snapped away from the muddy bride and locked onto me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing with calm, unwavering authority over the massive crowd, "I recognize that this is an entirely unprecedented situation. You drove out here today expecting to celebrate a joyous union. You expected a flawless display of high society elegance. Instead, you were subjected to a rather unfortunate display of criminal desperation and financial ruin. A low murmur rippled through the front rows. A prominent state judge standing near a black town car nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on me with sudden, intense respect. He recognized a power play when he saw one. As you have just witnessed, I continued pacing slowly across the locked barricade line. The union between Chantal Washington and Preston Sinclair will not be moving forward. The wedding is officially canceled. Several women in the crowd let out disappointed sighs, looking down at their expensive heels. Men began reaching into their pockets for their keys, clearly preparing for the long, awkward drive back to the city. The collective energy of the crowd shifted toward departure. I held up my free hand, halting their retreat. However, I announced, my voice cutting through the ambient noise like a silver blade. I am a businesswoman, and I absolutely abhor waste. Behind these iron gates sits a magnificent estate that has been painstakingly prepared for a world-class celebration. The custom floral arrangements have already been installed. The 10-piece string orchestra is currently tuning their instruments on the terrace. A spectacular 5-course meal, crafted by the finest culinary team in the state, is fully prepared and waiting. The vintage champagne is on ice. Everything has been paid for in full by my company. I paused, letting the sheer magnitude of that wealth settle over the crowd. The murmurs stopped entirely. The businessmen in the crowd stood a little taller, their ears perking up at the mention of my company's unchecked financial power. "Marcus," I said, turning my head slightly toward the towering lead guard, "open the gates." Marcus offered a sharp, respectful nod. He signaled the tactical security team. The heavy steel chains clanked loudly as they were unspooled. The massive iron gates groaned, swinging inward to reveal the breathtaking, sprawling beauty of the Montgomery estate. The crowd literally gasped. Beyond the gates lay acres of perfectly manicured emerald lawns. Crystal chandeliers hung suspended from the ancient sprawling branches of the oak trees, catching the morning sunlight and throwing prisms of light across the grass. A massive custom-built glass conservatory sat in the distance, glowing with thousands of fairy lights. Dozens of white-gloved waiters stood in perfect military formation along the winding cobblestone path, holding silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of expensive champagne, completely unfazed by the drama that had occurred at the perimeter. It was a display of absolute, undeniable billionaire wealth. It was everything Chantal had ever wanted, and it belonged entirely to me. "Today will no longer be a wedding," I announced, turning back to face the captivated audience. "Today we are pivoting. Today, ZZ Holdings is officially launching its new philanthropic division. We are hosting an exclusive charity gala and high-level networking event right here on the grounds." I looked directly at the wealthy investors, the hospital administrators, and the powerful politicians standing in the crowd. I held their gaze, daring them to walk away from the most lucrative room in the state. "We will be raising capital to fund substantial no-strings-attached grants for Black women entrepreneurs," I said, my voice ringing with fierce, undeniable pride. "We are funding brilliant, hardworking women who build their own empires from the ground up. Women who do not have massive trust funds to fall back on, and women who do not need rich husbands to rely on for their success." I lowered the microphone, offering the elite crowd a warm, inviting smile. "The food is hot, the drinks are cold, and the networking opportunities inside these gates are going to be unparalleled. Please leave your wedding gifts at the security checkpoint, grab a glass of champagne, and come inside." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the state judge stepped forward, a wide, impressed smile breaking across his face. He began to clap. The slow, rhythmic applause was instantly picked up by the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority sisters, who tossed their hair and marched eagerly toward the open gates. The church elders followed, their eyes wide with awe as they hurried past the barricade to grab their champagne. The wealthy doctors, the real estate developers, and the high society matriarchs surged forward as a unified, eager mass. They streamed through the iron gates, their laughter and excited chatter filling the air. And as they walked into my estate to celebrate my empire, every single one of them stepped directly around Chantal. She remained kneeling in the mud, a forgotten ruined obstacle in the dirt, watching her entire world leave her behind. The transition from a highly publicized, disastrously canceled wedding to an exclusive high-stakes networking gala was entirely seamless. Wealthy people pivot incredibly quickly when there is fresh money to be made and power to be courted. The collective cheer that erupted from the elite crowd was completely genuine, fueled by the intoxicating promise of exclusive business connections and free-flowing vintage champagne. They surged forward as a unified mass, their expensive Italian leather shoes and imported designer heels crunching violently over the sharp gravel. As they eagerly crossed the threshold of the newly opened iron gates, they completely dismissed the tragedy unfolding right at their feet. Chantal reached out a trembling, mud-stained hand toward her supposedly loyal sorority sisters. She called out a pathetic, broken plea to a prominent orthopedic surgeon she had spent months flattering and manipulating. The wealthy surgeon did not even break his stride. He simply stepped abruptly to the left, pulling his tailored tuxedo pants away from her desperate, muddy grasp. His eyes already locked firmly on the lavish culinary spread awaiting him inside. Her line sisters actively turned their heads in unison, pretending to admire the towering ancient oak trees just to avoid making any accidental eye contact with the weeping bride they had just spent thousands of dollars to celebrate. Chantal was no longer a real person to them. She was a massive social liability, a cautionary tale, and an embarrassing footnote they were eager to leave stranded outside the gates. Inside the sprawling estate, the atmosphere was instantly electric. The 10-piece string orchestra, sensing the abrupt shift in energy and leadership, seamlessly transitioned from classical wedding marches to upbeat, sophisticated jazz. White-gloved waiters moved gracefully through the massive crowd, offering heavy silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of chilled Dom Pérignon and delicate handcrafted canapés. I stood near the center of the grand stone terrace, the undisputed, unquestioned queen of an empire I had built entirely from the ground up. The very people who had looked right through me less than a week ago, the ones who had deemed me socially unfit for their pristine circles, were now practically tripping over themselves to enter my immediate orbit. The senior church elders, the exact same women who had stood silently by while Vivian weaponized her religious titles to justify abusing me, approached with wide, ingratiating smiles. They praised my visionary leadership, their voices dripping with fake syrupy warmth, as they completely ignored the fact that my mother was currently sitting handcuffed in the back of a federal police cruiser. They loudly proclaimed that they had always known I was destined for greatness, offering shallow performative prayers for the overwhelming success of my new philanthropic division. Right behind them were the elite alumni, the wealthy socialites who had previously scoffed at my lack of pedigree and banished me to the shadows. They aggressively swarmed me, their manicured hands thrusting embossed gold-foiled business cards directly into my personal space. They shamelessly begged for private lunch meetings, desperately pitching their own startup ideas, hoping to secure even a tiny fraction of the massive grants I had just announced. I accepted their cards with a cold, polished, unwavering smile, recognizing their sudden, intense adoration for exactly what it was. They did not respect me as a person. They respected the undeniable, crushing weight of my capital. They were desperate moths drawn to a brilliant flame, utterly oblivious to the fact that I was the one holding the match. I eventually excused myself from the groveling crowd and made my deliberate way toward the massive outdoor kitchen setup where the catering team was working frantically to keep up with the influx of demanding guests. The catering manager, a hard-working, exhausted woman named Sarah, looked up with wide, anxious eyes as I approached. She immediately began apologizing for the sudden chaotic shift in the menu and the pacing of the event, but I held up my hand to gently stop her. I vividly remembered Vivian's cruel, biting words from days ago, telling me I belonged in the kitchen with the hired help rather than sitting at her pristine head table. She had used honest, backbreaking labor as an insult to diminish my worth. "Sarah, the food is absolutely phenomenal," I said, my voice projecting clearly enough for the nearby wealthy guests to hear every single word. Your team adapted to this sudden massive change with absolute perfection. I pulled a sleek black checkbook from the inside pocket of my tailored crimson jacket. I quickly wrote out a check for $50,000 and handed it directly to her trembling hands. This is a personal bonus for you and your entire staff. Divide it equally among the servers, the cooks, and the valets. You are the absolute backbone of this event, and your hard work deserves to be fiercely recognized and rewarded. Sarah gasped loudly, tears instantly welling in her eyes as she stared at the massive number written on the check. The nearby socialites politely applauded, whispering to each other about my profound, inspiring generosity. They entirely missed the deeper significance of the gesture, mistaking it for performative charity. I was not performing for them. I was honoring the basic dignity of the people who actually built the world these entitled elites took for granted. As I turned back toward the main terrace, a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped smoothly into my path. It was Richard Sterling, one of the most prominent and ruthless venture capitalists on the East Coast. He had been on Chantal's exclusive guest list as a favor to Preston's supposedly wealthy family, but his eyes were now locked on me with predatory, calculating interest. "Zora," he said, extending a firm, steady hand. "That was the most brilliant, ruthless display of corporate pivoting I have ever witnessed in my entire career. You did not just expose a massive fraud, you capitalized on a captive audience." I shook his hand, my grip equally firm and unyielding. "I never let a good crisis go to waste, Richard." He chuckled, a low, deeply appreciative sound. "Your new philanthropic division for Black women entrepreneurs is exactly what the market needs right now. I want in. I am willing to commit $10 million to the inaugural grant fund, provided my firm gets to co-sponsor the official launch. We can hammer out the fine print on Monday morning, but consider this a verbal agreement." "It is a deal, Richard," I replied, sealing the multi-million-dollar partnership with a final definitive handshake. As he walked away to join the lavish celebration, I turned my attention toward the massive floor-to-ceiling bay windows of the glass conservatory. The pristine glass offered a crystal-clear view of the sprawling front lawns, the locked iron gates, and the rural highway beyond. The flashing police cruisers were long gone. The luxury cars had all been valeted inside the estate. The road outside was entirely empty except for a single tiny figure walking away in the distance. I stood perfectly still, watching in absolute silence as Chantal trudged alone down the shoulder of the highway. Her shoulders were violently slumped in defeat, and she was dragging the heavy mud-caked train of her $15,000 silk gown through the sharp gravel and toxic exhaust dust. 1 month later, that pathetic image of Chantal dragging her ruined gown down the highway was entirely eclipsed by the pristine, climate-controlled elegance of my downtown corporate boardroom. I sat comfortably at the head of a massive, polished mahogany table, the undisputed CEO of an empire that had only grown stronger in the wake of their spectacular downfall. The panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline, a stark contrast to the muddy rural road where my family's grand illusion of superiority had finally died. While they had spent the last 30 days drowning in legal fees, scrambling for shelter, and suffocating under the weight of immense public humiliation, I had spent the month distributing millions of dollars in grants to brilliant, hardworking women through Z Holdings' newly launched philanthropic division. The contrast between my ascending reality and their crushing demise was absolute. Harrison, my lead corporate attorney, adjusted his silver-framed glasses and flipped open a thick, heavily redacted legal file. He sat opposite me, surrounded by a team of junior associates who were taking meticulous notes. He delivered the latest updates with the cold, clinical precision of a surgeon dissecting a terminal case. The legal and financial fallout from that fateful Saturday morning had been relentless, sweeping, and completely merciless. "Let us begin with Vivian," Harrison said, sliding a high-resolution copy of a federal indictment across the polished wood. "Vivian Washington is currently staring down the barrel of up to 15 years in federal prison. The paper trail our forensic accountants uncovered was handed directly over to the FBI. The evidence regarding the wire fraud, the credit card fraud, and the aggravated identity theft is entirely insurmountable. They traced the IP addresses for the fraudulent loan applications directly to her personal laptop. Harrison paused, allowing a thin, knowing smile to touch his lips. To make matters infinitely worse for her, the church elders convened an emergency council meeting the very next morning. The exact same prominent women who attended your gala and witnessed her arrest spearheaded the initiative. They officially and publicly excommunicated her. They stripped Vivian of her prestigious elder title, revoked her usher board status, and permanently banned her from the congregation. They moved aggressively to protect their own pristine reputation from the toxic stain of her federal crimes. She is currently out on bail, heavily restricted to house arrest, with a GPS ankle monitor, and entirely isolated from the high society she worshipped. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my freshly brewed espresso. The bitter dark roast perfectly matched the cold, unwavering satisfaction settling in my chest. "And the Sinclair family?" I asked. "Completely decimated," Harrison replied, flipping to the next section of the heavy file. The illusion of their old money Charleston wealth evaporated the absolute second Preston fled the venue. The underground betting syndicates and aggressive corporate creditors descended on them like starving vultures. The silver Bentley was repossessed before the sun went down. Preston is currently in hiding, dodging subpoenas and avoiding process servers at every turn. Consequently, the bank formally foreclosed on their historic downtown residence. Eleanor was escorted off the premises by the sheriff's department, forced to weep on the sidewalk as her leased luxury furniture was hauled away. The Charleston elite have completely ostracized them. They have absolutely nothing left but crippling debt and public disgrace. I tapped my manicured fingernails against the mahogany wood, letting the profound weight of that justice settle over me. The villains who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small had been entirely eradicated by their own unmitigated greed. "And Chantal?" I asked, my voice dropping to a cool, lethal whisper. Harrison sighed, pulling out a separate thinner folder labeled with her name. "This is where the collateral damage is the most severe and permanent." Chantal's name was heavily implicated in the fraudulent loan documents. While she was not the primary mastermind, her signature is on several forged financial disclosures used to secure the catering and the venue rentals. Because of this direct, undeniable involvement in a federal investigation, the state medical board launched an immediate aggressive inquiry into her professional character and fitness. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute gravity. "They have officially suspended her medical license pending a full, exhaustive review. She is barred from practicing medicine anywhere in the state. The prestigious orthopedic surgeons she sought to impress have completely severed ties with her, refusing to answer her calls. Furthermore, because Preston's accounts were frozen by the feds and his initial deposit checks bounced, Chantal is personally legally liable for the remaining balances owed to the wedding vendors. The florists, the custom dressmakers, the limousine services, and the rental companies have all filed aggressive civil suits against her. She is drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. Her flawless credit is ruined. She has absolutely zero income, and her social reputation is irreparably shattered." I looked out the glass windows, watching the bustling city below. They had spent my entire life trying to tear me down, utterly convinced that their superficial social standing and deceitful manipulation made them inherently superior. They had treated my success as a threat to be neutralized, and my identity as something to be ashamed of. Now the absolute finality of their toxic choices had caught up with them. The universe had delivered a masterclass in karma, and it was genuinely breathtaking to witness. I searched myself for a fraction of sympathy for the sister I once tried to love, but I found the well completely dry. There was no pity in my heart, only a cold, deeply satisfying sense of closure. I had not destroyed them. I had simply stepped out of their way, protected my own assets, and let them destroy themselves. Before Harrison could close the files and move on to the agenda for our newly launched philanthropic initiatives, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom slid open. My executive assistant, Maya, stepped into the room. She held a sleek digital tablet to her chest, her posture rigid, her expression a careful mixture of professional neutrality and underlying tension. She knew the ugly history of my family, and she knew the firm, impenetrable boundaries I had established regarding their access to my life. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for the interruption," Maya said, her voice steady but urgent as it carried across the silent boardroom. "What is it, Maya?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "Your sister is in the main lobby downstairs," Maya replied, glancing nervously at the live security feed on her tablet. She somehow bypassed the standard security desk by slipping into the elevator bank behind a delivery courier. She is currently surrounded by our lobby guards. She is crying hysterically, and she is begging for 5 minutes of your time. She says she has absolutely nowhere else to go. "Send her up," I told Maya, my voice betraying absolutely no emotion. Harrison and the junior associates immediately began gathering their thick legal files, preparing to give me privacy for what they assumed would be a sensitive family matter. I raised a single hand, halting their retreat. "Stay exactly where you are," I instructed the room. "Transparency is how we operate at Z Holdings. There will be no secret conversations today, and absolutely no backroom family deals. My sister is about to walk into a corporate environment, and she will be treated like any other high-risk liability seeking a meeting." A heavy, expectant silence settled over the boardroom. Less than 2 minutes later, the frosted glass doors slid open with a soft, mechanical hum. Two of my towering lobby security guards stepped inside, flanking the woman who had spent her entire life making sure I felt entirely invisible. The visual contrast was genuinely staggering. Just 1 month ago, Chantal had demanded absolute perfection. She had paraded around in imported silks dripping in borrowed diamonds, wearing an arrogant smirk that signaled her supposed superiority to the world. The woman standing before me now was completely unrecognizable. She wore a faded, oversized gray sweater and wrinkled black trousers. Her perfectly flat ironed hair was pulled into a messy, uneven knot at the base of her neck. She wore zero makeup, leaving the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes fully exposed. She clutched a cheap canvas tote bag against her chest like a physical shield. She looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of the flawless socialite she had pretended to be. Chantal stepped forward, her eyes darting nervously toward Harrison and the team of lawyers sitting around the massive mahogany table. She swallowed hard, clearly humiliated by the audience, but she was far too desperate to turn back. She dragged her feet across the plush carpet until she stood at the opposite end of the long table, gripping the back of an expensive leather chair to steady her shaking hands. "Zora." Chantal began, her voice cracking instantly into a pathetic, ragged rasp. "Please. I know I have no right to be here. I know you are furious with me, but I have absolutely nowhere else to turn. The state medical board is moving forward with their disciplinary hearing next week. They are going to revoke my medical license permanently." She paused, taking a shaky breath, as tears welled in her bloodshot eyes. "The civil suits from the wedding vendors are destroying me. The florists, the caterers, the event planners, they are all coming after me for the bounced checks," Preston wrote. "My bank accounts have been frozen. My credit is completely ruined. I cannot even afford to rent a studio apartment. I have been sleeping on a friend's couch, and she told me I have to leave by tomorrow." I sat back in my chair, folding my hands neatly on the polished wood. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a seat. I simply watched her unravel. "I am begging you, Zora." Chantal sobbed, the tears finally spilling over her cheeks and dripping onto her faded sweater. "I just need a loan. Just enough to hire a decent defense attorney for the medical board hearing and settle the civil suits before they force me into bankruptcy. I will pay you back every single penny with interest. I will sign whatever contracts your lawyers want. We are sisters, Zora. We grew up under the same roof. Please do not do this to me. Blood is thicker than water." The sheer audacity of her plea hung heavily in the climate-controlled air. She was actually trying to invoke the sacred bond of sisterhood, a bond she had spent 30 years actively destroying. I leaned forward slowly, resting my forearms on the table. My voice was deadpan, completely devoid of the warmth she was so desperately trying to manipulate. Blood is just biology, Chantal. I stated my words, hitting the silent room like drops of freezing rain. Loyalty is a choice. You chose status over me every single time. You chose to alienate your own sister because I did not fit your pristine high society aesthetic. You chose to stand by and laugh while Vivian verbally and emotionally abused me. You chose to participate in a fraudulent loan scheme leveraging my name and my assets to fund a fake wedding to a bankrupt con artist. Chantal shook her head frantically, gripping the chair so hard her knuckles turned stark white. I made a mistake, Zora. I was blinded by the pressure to succeed. I just wanted Mother to be proud of me. Do not dare blame Vivian for your greed, I snapped, my tone lethally sharp. You wanted the power. You wanted the elite connections. You wanted to be the queen of a social circle that views people like me as the hired help. You made your choices with your eyes wide open, and now you are facing the invoice. You reap what you sow. I am not a bank for your bad decisions, and I will not finance your legal defense for crimes you absolutely committed. The answer is no. The moment the word no left my lips, the pathetic weeping facade instantly evaporated. Chantal's tears stopped cold. Her posture straightened, and the familiar ugly contortion of narcissistic rage twisted her exhausted features. The victim routine had failed, so she instantly reverted to the only other tactic she knew. You planned this! Chantal shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. She slammed her hands flat against the mahogany table. You orchestrated this entire thing just to humiliate me. You could have warned me about Preston privately. You could have paid the vendors quietly. But you wanted to make a public spectacle out of my life. You wanted to destroy me because you have always been jealous of me. I stood up from my chair, my movement slow, deliberate, and radiating absolute power. I looked down the length of the table at the frantic, screaming woman who had once thought she was untouchable. I didn't destroy you, Chantal, I said, my voice ringing with cold, absolute finality. Your own vanity did. I shifted my gaze past her to the two massive security guards waiting by the frosted glass doors. I offered them a brief, dismissive nod. Security, escort her out. Send her up, I told Maya, my voice betraying absolutely no emotion. Harrison and the junior associates immediately began gathering their thick legal files, sliding their expensive silver pens into their leather briefcases. They were clearly preparing to give me privacy for what they assumed would be a highly sensitive, emotional family matter. I raised a single hand, instantly halting their retreat. Stay exactly where you are, I instructed the room, my tone leaving no room for debate. Transparency is how we operate at Z Holdings. There will be no secret conversations today, and absolutely no backroom family deals. My sister is about to walk into a strictly corporate environment, and she will be treated exactly like any other high-risk financial liability seeking a meeting. Please keep your notebooks open. A heavy, expectant silence settled over the boardroom. The air conditioning hummed faintly in the background. Less than 2 minutes later, the frosted glass doors slid open with a soft mechanical glide. Two of my towering lobby security guards stepped inside, flanking the woman who had spent her entire life making sure I felt entirely invisible. The visual contrast was genuinely staggering. Just 1 month ago, Chantal had demanded absolute perfection from everyone around her. She had paraded around the country club in imported silks, dripping in borrowed diamonds, wearing an arrogant smirk that constantly signaled her supposed superiority to the world. The woman standing before me now was completely unrecognizable. She wore a faded, oversized gray sweater that swallowed her frame and wrinkled black trousers that dragged slightly on the floor. Her perfectly flat ironed hair was pulled into a messy, uneven knot at the base of her neck. She wore zero makeup, leaving the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes, fully exposed under the harsh fluorescent boardroom lights. She clutched a cheap canvas tote bag against her chest like a physical shield. She looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of the flawless socialite she had pretended to be. Chantal stepped forward, her eyes darting nervously toward Harrison and the team of lawyers sitting completely still around the massive mahogany table. She swallowed hard, clearly humiliated by the audience, but she was far too desperate to turn back. She dragged her feet across the plush carpet until she stood at the opposite end of the long table, gripping the back of an expensive leather chair to steady her shaking hands. Zora Chantal began, her voice cracking instantly into a pathetic, ragged rasp. Please, I know I have no right to be here. I know you are furious with me, but I have absolutely nowhere else to turn. The state medical board is moving forward with their disciplinary hearing next week. They are going to revoke my medical license permanently. She paused, taking a shaky breath as tears welled in her bloodshot eyes. The civil suits from the wedding vendors are destroying me. The florists, the caterers, the event planners, they are all coming after me for the bounced checks, Preston wrote. My bank accounts have been frozen. My credit is completely ruined. I cannot even afford to rent a studio apartment. I have been sleeping on a friend's couch, and she told me I have to leave by tomorrow morning. I sat back in my chair, folding my hands neatly on the polished wood. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a seat. I simply watched her unravel, feeling a profound sense of detachment. I am begging you, Zora, Chantal sobbed, the tears finally spilling over her cheeks and dripping onto her faded sweater. I just need a loan. Just enough to hire a decent defense attorney for the medical board hearing and settle the civil suits before they force me into bankruptcy. I will pay you back every single penny with interest. I will sign whatever contracts your lawyers want. We are sisters, Zora. We grew up under the same roof. Please do not do this to me. Blood is thicker than water. The sheer audacity of her plea hung heavily in the climate-controlled air. She was actually trying to invoke the sacred bond of sisterhood, a bond she had spent 30 years actively destroying to save herself from the consequences of her own actions. She had watched our mother verbally abuse me for years and had smiled. She had known the wedding was funded by stolen money and had happily worn the stolen gown. Now stripped of her stolen status, she expected me to be her savior. I leaned forward slowly, resting my forearms on the table. My voice was deadpan, completely devoid of the warmth she was so desperately trying to manipulate. Blood is just biology, Chantal. I stated my words, hitting the silent room like drops of freezing rain. Loyalty is a choice. You chose status over me every single time. You chose to alienate your own sister because I did not fit your pristine high society aesthetic. You chose to stand by and laugh while Vivian verbally and emotionally abused me. You chose to participate in a fraudulent loan scheme, leveraging my name and my assets to fund a fake wedding to a bankrupt con artist. You never once treated me like blood when you thought you were on top. Chantal shook her head frantically, gripping the chair so hard her knuckles turned stark white. I made a mistake, Zora. I was blinded by the pressure to succeed. I just wanted Mother to be proud of me. I wanted to fit in with Preston's family. I did not mean to hurt you. Do not dare blame Vivian for your greed. I snapped, my tone lethally sharp. You wanted the power. You wanted the elite connections. You wanted to be the queen of a social circle that views people like me as the hired help. You made your choices with your eyes wide open, and now you are facing the invoice. You reap what you sow. I am not a bank for your bad decisions, and I will not finance your legal defense for crimes you absolutely committed. The answer is no. The moment the word no left my lips, the pathetic weeping facade instantly evaporated. Chantal's tears stopped cold. Her posture straightened, and the familiar ugly contortion of narcissistic rage twisted her exhausted features. The victim routine had failed, so she instantly reverted to the only other tactic she knew. You planned this! Chantal shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls as she slammed her hands flat against the mahogany table. You orchestrated this entire thing just to humiliate me. You could have warned me about Preston privately. You could have paid the vendors quietly. But you wanted to make a public spectacle out of my life. You wanted to destroy me because you have always been jealous of me. I stood up from my chair, my movement slow, deliberate, and radiating absolute power. I looked down the length of the table at the frantic, screaming woman who had once thought she was untouchable. I didn't destroy you, Chantal, I said, my voice ringing with cold, absolute finality. Your own vanity did. Security escort her out. The heavy velvet curtains parted, and I stepped out onto the magnificent stage of the Sisters' Chapel at Spelman College. The roar of the crowd was immediate and deafening. Thousands of young, brilliant black women packed the historic auditorium, their faces turned toward me, with a mixture of profound respect and eager anticipation. Just over a decade ago, I had walked away from this exact campus. I was a terrified, exhausted dropout with failing grades, zero financial support, and a family that loudly declared my departure was a permanent, unforgivable disgrace. My mother had told me I had ruined my life. Vivian had insisted I would amount to absolutely nothing. Now I was standing at the podium as their highly anticipated keynote speaker, a self-made billionaire, and the founder of a rapidly expanding philanthropic empire. I gripped the edges of the polished wooden podium, letting the sheer undeniable victory of this homecoming settle deeply into my bones. The applause slowly faded into a reverent, absolute silence. I looked out into the sea of vibrant, hopeful faces. I saw the exact same ambition, anxiety, and heavy burdens that I had carried at their age. I leaned toward the microphone, my voice ringing out with crystal clear authority. I know exactly what it feels like to sit in those seats. I began holding the gaze of a young woman in the front row. I know the crushing, suffocating weight of expectations. As Black women, we are constantly told that we must be absolutely flawless. We are instructed to secure the right degrees, marry into the right prominent families, and project an image of pristine, untouchable excellence just to be deemed worthy of basic respect. We are taught to perform for a society that constantly shifts the goalposts. And far worse, we are often taught to perform for our own families. A heavy murmur of agreement rippled through the massive crowd. I stepped away from the podium, closing the physical distance between myself and the audience. For years, I allowed my blood relatives to convince me that my worth was permanently tied to a rigid, superficial checklist. My mother and my sister worshipped blindly at the altar of high society. They sincerely believed that designer labels, elite zip codes, and proximity to old money were the only valid markers of success. When I refused to play their toxic, exhausting game, when I chose to build my own business from the dirt up, rather than hunt for a wealthy husband, they labeled me a disappointment. They called me an embarrassment. They actively tried to erase me from their pristine narrative. I paused, letting the heavy truth of my words sink into the silent auditorium. I know many of you are carrying that exact same invisible weight today. You are twisting yourselves into knots, sacrificing your mental health, and abandoning your true passions just to satisfy the relentless demands of the people who share your DNA. You are pouring your energy into a bottomless well, hoping that if you just achieve one more accolade, your toxic family members will finally love you the way you deserve. I raised my hand, my voice echoing with fierce, unwavering conviction. Do not let anyone, not your mother, not your sister, not society, tell you that your path is invalid because it does not look like theirs. Blood is just biology. It is not a permanent, unbreakable contract that requires you to endure emotional abuse or sacrifice your authentic self. Real excellence is not about securing white approval or impressing elite socialites. Real enduring Black excellence is about absolute authenticity. It is about having the terrifying, unshakable courage to build your own table when your family refuses to pull up a chair for you. It is about defining your own worth and funding your own empires. I swept my gaze across the balcony, making sure my voice reached the very back row. I launched the First Generation Fund specifically for women exactly like you. We are distributing millions of dollars in capital to brilliant minds who do not have massive inheritances to fall back on. We are funding women who are tired of needing cosigners to validate their brilliance. We are building generational wealth that cannot be taken away by a resentful parent or an envious sibling. Your ambition is your capital. Your resilience is your pedigree. You are entirely enough exactly as you are, and your potential is utterly limitless. For a split second after I finished, the chapel was completely silent. Then the entire auditorium erupted. Thousands of young women surged to their feet simultaneously. The applause was a physical force, a thunderous, rolling wave of pure, unfiltered validation that shook the historic building to its very foundation. Students were cheering loudly, wiping away tears of recognition and raising their hands in absolute solidarity. I saw young women holding each other, feeling profoundly seen and completely understood. The painful, isolating secret of familial rejection had been dragged into the light and entirely stripped of its power. I stood at the edge of the stage, letting the massive wall of sound wash over me. The deep, jagged wounds inflicted by Vivian and Chantal, the years of feeling inadequate, invisible, and unlovable, finally stitched themselves closed permanently. I had taken the most toxic, destructive poison my family had ever fed me and transmuted it into a powerful healing antidote for an entire generation of future leaders. I took a deep, respectful bow, my heart lighter and stronger than it had ever been. As I turned and walked purposefully off the brightly lit stage, the adrenaline hummed warmly through my veins. The heavy velvet curtains swung shut behind me, muting the lingering roar of the crowd. I walked into the quiet, dimly lit backstage corridor, fully expecting to meet my security team and head to the waiting motorcade. Instead, a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped smoothly out of the shadows. It was Julian, the brilliant self-made tech entrepreneur I had met during the impromptu networking gala at my estate a month ago. He was leaning casually against the brick wall, a warm, completely genuine smile breaking across his handsome face. He held a massive, stunning bouquet of rare blue orchids. Julian did not care about my family's scandalous history or my previous lack of social standing. He only saw the powerful, independent woman I had built myself to be. He stepped forward, handing me the vibrant flowers with a look of profound, unwavering respect. "That was an absolute masterpiece, Zora," he said, his deep voice resonating with quiet, grounding confidence. "Are you ready to celebrate your victory?" I took the orchids, their vibrant blue petals a stark contrast to the sterile backstage environment. "Yes," I answered, my voice steady and light. "I am more than ready." We walked out of the historic chapel and into the warm evening air, leaving the noise, the expectations, and the ghosts of my past far behind. That night marked a definitive shift. The narrative I had been fighting against my entire life was officially dead, replaced by a reality I had built with my own two hands. 6 months later, the universe settled all remaining debts with terrifying precision. The scales of justice balanced themselves without requiring any further intervention from me. Chantal did not lose her medical license entirely, but the disciplinary board stripped her of her pristine private practice privileges. The disgraced socialite who once demanded imported silk scrubs and catered lunches was now working the grueling graveyard shift at a severely underfunded urgent care clinic on the industrial outskirts of the city. Her nights were an endless, exhausting blur of fluorescent lights, screaming toddlers, and overflowing waiting rooms. There were no elite networking opportunities. There were no country club galas. There was only the harsh reality of her garnished wages. Because she had foolishly co-signed several of Preston's initial fraudulent business loans during their brief, disastrous courtship, a massive percentage of her meager paycheck was legally seized every 2 weeks. She lived in a cramped, drafty studio apartment above a noisy laundromat, entirely stripped of the luxury she had sacrificed her own sister to obtain. Preston faced a humiliation that was perhaps even more poetic. After avoiding prison by testifying against his co-conspirators, he found himself utterly unemployable in the financial sector. His reputation was radioactive. The man who had once charmed his way into exclusive VIP lounges was now working as a valet at the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was the exact same club where he and Chantal had once dined, the very place they had loudly pretended to belong. Now wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform, Preston spent his days sprinting across hot asphalt to park the Aston Martins and Bentleys of the very people he had once tried to scam. They tossed him crumpled dollar bills without ever looking at his face. He had become entirely invisible. As for Vivian, her reality was confined to the concrete walls of a minimum security federal facility. The high society friends she had worshipped, the wealthy neighbors she had constantly tried to impress, had completely erased her from their collective memory. Her name was never spoken at their charity luncheons. She received 0 visitors. The elite world she had worshipped had discarded her the exact second she became a financial liability. I thought of none of them as I walked down the grand, sweeping staircase of the Montgomery estate. It was Thanksgiving Day. Outside, a crisp autumn breeze swept colorful leaves across the manicured lawns. Inside, the massive stone fireplace crackled with a warm, inviting fire. The air was thick with the rich, savory scents of roasting turkey, fresh rosemary, and warm, buttery yeast rolls. But the most remarkable thing about the atmosphere was the absolute absence of tension. For the first time in my 30 years of existence, a major holiday was not a battlefield. There was no toxic mother hovering critically over the stove, loudly complaining that the stuffing was too dry, or commenting on how my dress made my hips look wide. There was no envious sister demanding that the lighting be adjusted for her social media photos. There was no walking on eggshells, no shrinking myself down to avoid setting off a family explosion. There was only joy. I stepped into the formal dining room where the long mahogany table was set with elegant crystal and simple rustic centerpieces. The room was buzzing with genuine, unforced laughter. This was my chosen family. Maya and Harrison sat near the middle, passionately debating a new marketing strategy while sharing a plate of appetizers. Beside them sat three young, brilliant women who had recently received their first rounds of funding from the First Generation Fund. They were comparing business plans, their eyes shining with the exact same fierce ambition I had recognized in myself. They were not my employees, they were my legacy. At the head of the table stood Julian. He was casually pouring a vintage red wine into a guest's glass, his presence radiating a deep, calming warmth. When he saw me enter the room, his face lit up. He set the bottle down and walked over, pulling me into a gentle, grounding embrace. He pressed a soft kiss to my temple, entirely unconcerned with performing for an audience. His love was steady, secure, and completely authentic. I took my seat beside him as the food was brought to the table. Conversations flowed easily, shifting from business ventures to travel plans to terrible jokes that made the entire room echo with laughter. I looked around the table at the faces of the people who respected me, protected me, and valued me simply for existing. They did not care about my net worth, and they certainly did not care about the social status of my parents. They were here because of mutual loyalty and genuine affection. Julian reached over and handed me a crystal glass filled with dark, rich wine. He tapped his knife against his glass, bringing the lively room to a comfortable, expectant hush. To Zora, Julian said, raising his glass toward me, his eyes locked onto mine. To the woman who built her own table when the world tried to tell her she did not deserve a seat. The entire table raised their glasses, their voices blending into a warm, harmonious cheer. I stood up slowly, picking up my wine. I looked at the brilliant entrepreneurs I was guiding. I looked at the loyal friends who had shielded me when I was vulnerable. I looked at the man who stood by my side as an equal partner. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. It was rich and perfectly aged. I smiled, feeling the warmth spread all the way down to my toes. The ultimate revenge was never about shouting the loudest or tearing my family down. The truest, most spectacular victory was standing exactly where I was right now, living a brilliant, beautiful, and completely unbothered life, utterly untouched by the people who had tried to destroy me. I was finally perfectly at peace. The core lesson from Zora's journey is that your worth is never dictated by toxic family dynamics. Blood does not obligate you to endure continued emotional abuse. True success comes when you finally find the courage to walk away from those who diminish your light and establish firm boundaries. By focusing on authentic growth and building a chosen family rooted in mutual respect, you can transform profound trauma into undeniable triumph. Living a spectacularly unbothered life is the absolute sweetest justice. Share your experiences with setting healthy boundaries in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience.